Most people experience thoughts as direct expressions of who they are. A thought appears, and consciousness immediately experiences ownership. My thought, my fear, my opinion, my memory, my desire. This happens so automatically that the distinction between awareness and mental activity becomes almost invisible. Yet psychologically, thoughts emerge continuously before conscious control fully organizes them. Memories surface automatically. Emotional reactions appear automatically. Internal narration begins automatically. Associations activate beneath awareness long before consciousness recognizes them. The mind then experiences the final thought stream as personal identity itself. This creates one of the deepest forms of psychological fusion. The observer becomes identified with what is being observed. A person no longer notices thoughts as events happening within awareness. They experience thoughts as the self directly. The result is profound identification. Anxiety becomes I am anxious. Failure becomes I am a failure. Intrusive thoughts become something is wrong with me. The mind collapses observer and content into one structure. Yet the existence of observation itself suggests something deeper. If awareness can notice thought, question thought, resist thought, reinterpret thought, or observe thought changing, then consciousness may not be identical to the thought stream it experiences. The distinction is subtle, but psychologically enormous. Thought generation is largely automatic because the nervous system continuously predicts, remembers, interprets, and simulates reality beneath awareness. Sensory information enters, memory activates, emotion influences relevance, associations form. The brain begins constructing responses before conscious awareness fully recognizes the process. A person may suddenly remember something embarrassing, imagine a future conversation, replay a conflict, or feel fear without intentionally deciding to think any of it. The thought simply appears. Consciousness encounters the result afterward. This is deeply unsettling because people prefer believing they consciously author every mental event. Yet much of mental life arrives already formed. The mind generates possibilities continuously because prediction improves adaptation. Thoughts therefore function partly as outputs of deeper emotional, cognitive, and predictive systems operating automatically beneath awareness. The observer experiences the stream after it emerges. Intrusive thoughts reveal this process clearly because intrusive thoughts often feel alien to conscious identity. Violent images, irrational fears, socially unacceptable ideas, unwanted memories, bizarre possibilities. Many people experience thoughts they strongly disagree with emotionally. The suffering comes partly because the individual assumes ownership immediately. The thought appears and becomes evidence about identity. Why did I think that? What does it mean about me? Yet intrusive thoughts demonstrate something important. The mind can generate content consciousness does not endorse. Thoughts appear automatically regardless of personal values. The observer then reacts afterward. This suggests identity cannot be reduced entirely to thought content, because awareness itself may remain separate from the mental event it is witnessing. The pain emerges when observer and thought fuse completely beneath awareness. Overthinking intensifies because the observer becomes trapped inside the thought stream instead of observing it. A fear appears. The mind reacts to the fear. New thoughts emerge about the reaction. Identity becomes involved. Prediction increases. Emotional tension rises. The observer gradually loses psychological distance until awareness feels submerged inside continuous mental activity. At that point, thoughts stop appearing as events and start appearing as reality itself. The person becomes the narrative. The anxiety becomes the self. The internal voice becomes truth. Overthinking, therefore, often reflects not merely excessive cognition, but excessive identification with cognition beneath awareness. The observer fused with the stream it was originally capable of noticing. Emotion strengthens this fusion because emotional states influence which thoughts feel believable. During sadness, negative interpretations become easier to access. During anxiety, danger predictions dominate awareness. During shame, self-critical thoughts feel more convincing. Consciousness then mistakes emotionally activated thought patterns for objective truth because emotion changes perception automatically. The observer becomes identified not only with thought, but with emotion-conditioned thought. The resulting experience feels completely real while active because awareness temporarily loses distance from the mental content it is experiencing. Later, once emotion changes, the person often wonders why those thoughts felt so certain. The answer is not weakness, it is fusion. Awareness became absorbed into emotionally organized mental activity beneath awareness. Identity becomes deeply fused with thought because repeated mental patterns gradually stabilize into self-concept across time. Certain internal narratives repeat often enough that they stop feeling like temporary interpretations and begin feeling like permanent truth. I am not enough. I always fail. I need to prove myself. People leave. I must stay in control. These thoughts may begin as emotional reactions, but repetition gives them psychological weight. The nervous system starts organizing prediction, memory selection, relationships, and behavior around them automatically. Eventually, the individual no longer experiences the statement as a thought. It becomes identity. The observer forgets it is witnessing a repeated cognitive pattern and begins living inside the pattern itself. This is one reason self-concepts feel so stable. The mind repeated certain thoughts long enough that awareness fused with them beneath consciousness. The story then feels self-evident, because the observer experiences life through the thought, rather than observing the thought as one construction among many possibilities. Language intensifies this identification because internal narration transforms mental activity into personal ownership continuously. Human beings do not merely think emotionally or visually. They narrate experience. I should have done better. I ruined this. I need to fix it. Why am I like this? Language creates continuity by linking events into narrative explanation. Yet the same system also strengthens identification, because the observer experiences the narration in first-person form repeatedly. The internal voice sounds personal because it uses personal structure. Over time, consciousness begins assuming the narrator must be identical with the self itself. But psychologically, narration may simply be another process occurring within awareness. The mind generates commentary continuously because commentary stabilizes meaning and prediction. The observer then experiences the narration as identity because the voice feels intimate and familiar. Familiarity becomes mistaken for selfhood beneath awareness. Meditative traditions noticed this distinction long before modern psychology described cognitive fusion, because sustained observation often reveals that thoughts continue appearing even when a person stops intentionally participating in them. Sit quietly long enough and memories arise. Future scenarios appear. Emotional commentary begins. Random associations surface. Internal language continues moving despite deliberate effort to remain still. Many people find this unsettling because it reveals how little direct authorship exists over moment-to-moment mental activity. Consciousness experiences thoughts happening. The observer notices movement already occurring. This does not mean agency disappears entirely. It means awareness and thought may not be identical systems. One generates content. The other experiences content. Confusing the two creates enormous psychological suffering because every passing thought becomes evidence about identity itself. Relationships expose this mechanism powerfully because attachment activates thought streams that feel intensely personal and absolute. After rejection, the mind produces narratives, I was not enough. During uncertainty, they are leaving. During conflict, everything is collapsing. These thoughts feel emotionally undeniable because attachment systems amplify relevance and urgency. Yet many of these mental events reflect prediction, fear, memory, and emotional conditioning more than objective reality. The observer experiences them as truth because emotional activation reduces psychological distance. The thought and the self temporarily merge. Later, Once regulation returns, the person often recognizes the distortion and wonders why the thoughts felt so convincing earlier. The answer is not irrationality. It is identification. Awareness became absorbed into attachment-conditioned cognition beneath awareness. Silence often becomes uncomfortable because external stimulation weakens and thought activity becomes more visible. During daily life, work, conversation, entertainment, and routine occupy attention continuously. Quiet removes many of these external anchors. The observer suddenly encounters the mind more directly. Thoughts become louder not because silence created them, but because awareness stopped being distracted from them temporarily. This is why people often discover how active their minds truly are only during stillness. Internal narration continues, memories return, prediction resumes, emotional processing surfaces. Many interpret this as failure because they expected silence to remove thought. But psychologically, silence often reveals the ongoing activity that was already present beneath external occupation. The observer finally sees the stream more clearly. The fear of thoughts often creates more suffering than the thoughts themselves because resistance increases identification. An unwanted thought appears. The person reacts, "I should not think this." Attention increases. Emotional significance rises. Monitoring begins. The nervous system now treats the thought as important because importance improves prediction. The mental event becomes more accessible and returns repeatedly. The observer then experiences escalating distress because the thought feels increasingly central. Yet the suffering emerged partly from fusion and resistance combined. Awareness moved closer to the thought while simultaneously trying to push it away. The result is psychological entanglement. The observer becomes trapped inside the content it fears instead of recognizing the content as transient mental activity occurring within awareness. Impermanence applies to thought as well because no thought remains permanently. Every mental event changes, dissolves, transforms, or disappears eventually. The mind continuously generates and releases content beneath awareness, yet consciousness often behaves as if current thoughts define enduring reality. A painful belief feels permanent. A fear feels final. A self-judgment feels absolute. The observer forgets that thought itself is transient. Hours later, days later, years later, entirely different mental worlds may exist. This reveals something important. Identity built entirely from thought becomes unstable because thought itself never stops moving. Awareness experiences continuity partly because it witnesses changing mental content across time, rather than remaining identical to every passing cognitive state. The observer layer becomes visible whenever a person notices thought without immediately becoming it. The moment awareness says, "I am noticing anxiety," instead of "I am anxiety," distance appears. I am noticing fear instead of "I am fear." A thought is present instead of "this thought is me." This shift seems small linguistically but transforms psychological experience. Observation returns. Fusion weakens. Identity expands beyond immediate mental content. The thought may remain, yet the observer no longer collapses into it completely. Consciousness regains perspective. The mind becomes something being experienced, rather than something identical with the self at every moment. This distinction does not mean the observer is mystical, separate from the brain, or detached from psychology. The observer may simply be awareness itself, the capacity to experience mental events without fully becoming every event it encounters. Thoughts still matter. Emotions still matter. Identity still matters. But awareness gains flexibility when it stops treating all mental content as absolute self-definition. The observer can engage thought, question thought, reinterpret thought, and release thought because it is no longer fully fused with every cognitive event passing through consciousness. This flexibility creates enormous psychological freedom because suffering often intensifies when identity contracts around temporary mental states beneath awareness. The deeper realization is not that thoughts are meaningless, or that the self should eliminate thinking. It is that consciousness often confuses awareness with content. Thoughts arise automatically from memory, prediction, emotion, attachment, identity, and countless unconscious processes beneath awareness. The observer encounters them afterward and immediately experiences ownership. Over time, repeated fusion makes thought feel identical with selfhood itself. But once observation becomes visible, something changes. The question stops being, "Why am I thinking this?" and becomes, "What is noticing this thought?" And within that shift emerges a different relationship with the mind. The observer no longer needs to destroy thought to find peace. It only needs to remember that awareness may be larger than the stream of mental activity continuously moving through it.